Welcome to a fantastic edition of the Rebellion's Educational Series. I'm here with Chris Kelleher, uh, brilliant quant, who I first came across when he was at Convexity Capital over 20 years ago. He's now at Fidelity, and his new book is a must purchase for any quant, whether you're a 19-year-old quant student or a 32-year-old Citadel programmer looking for kind of a next leg up. I believe education is foremost important for any quant. And I've been in the quant field for 20 years, and so excited to have Chris talk about quantitative finance with Python, a practical guide to investment management, trading, and financial engineering. Chris, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, what was the genesis for this book?
So the baseline for the book is courses that I've taught over the years at BU. So for 5 or 6 years, I've been an adjunct faculty member, started teaching one class, computational methods in finance, and over the course of the years got to add to my portfolio over time. And one of the things that I saw was students coming in. One of the courses that I had was a programming course, but it was programming for math finance. And one of the things that I really observed there is that students entering graduate study are trying to learn really 3 legs of a stool. The first leg is the quant techniques, the second leg is the finance, and the third leg is programming. And to learn all of those 3 things from the ground up, I think is pretty challenging. And so I took it as sort of my mission or my mandate to try to help along all 3 of those things, which is obviously pretty ambitious. And so that's where the book is supposed to sort of fill in some of the details. So there's a lot of coding in there, there's a lot of math in there, and there's a lot of finance in there. And at each point, that's sort of where I'm trying to emphasize that each of those things, and my view of quants or my view of people who graduate from these MFE type programs is they are supposed to exist at the intersection of those 3 things, and each of those things are equally important. So I felt this was a good way for me to contribute. I've always wanted to write a book. I spoke at a conference, and the publisher saw me speak and asked me to write a book, and I was just jazzed. And I said, I got to do it. Can't miss this opportunity.
No, totally. So, would you say that this book is more of a technical guide, more of a field guide?
That's a great question. So I think it's definitely used as a textbook in my courses. But I also think there's a very practical lens to it. So, my background, as you mentioned, is from industry. I've been working in the industry longer than I like to admit. And so I really try to, and another thing about my background is it's from industry, and I've had a lot of different stops along the way. So I've had derivative shops, I've been at sort of equity long short, quantitative shops. And so I think I've tried to infuse a lot of that in the book. So a lot of that sort of practical nature that I've learned are sort of throughout different chapters of the book. And there's a few different ways that I do that. So as an example, I look at some interesting market anomalies that have happened over the years and do case studies on them. So the 2018, there was this crazy Volmageddon or whatever, where the inverse vol ETFs blew up. And in 2015, the Swiss franc peg broke. And so those are 2 things that I talk about in detail. And then also I talk about trades that I have done in the past in an investment perspective section. So that tries to bring it back to practice, but also I don't want to leave the theory behind. It's definitely not your most technical textbook. So if you compare it to like a Shreve or a stochastic calculus textbook, we don't go that deep into sort of the theory behind things. We focus a little bit more on intuition, but we want to be able to sort of build up both sides of it. So I would say sort of a mix. And I'm hoping for practitioners, especially, it's a good reference book where if they have some project that's maybe a little bit new to them, they don't have to read the whole book, but they can pick up a part and sort of hit the ground running, especially with the coding samples that it comes with.
Would you opine a little bit on your Swiss peg insight in the book?
Yeah, so that was one of the case studies. And so the idea was there was a lot of pressure on the peg. And there was a lot of, I would say, sort of speculation that the peg was going to break. And if you look at what happened immediately after the peg, sort of the volatility of that movement was massive and not something that you would see in sort of normal market conditions or normal market events. And I guess that's sort of similar to the other event that I mentioned, Volmageddon, where an inverse ETF broke. That's not a market that's not sort of a market movement that you're normal to see. So, we talk a lot about jump processes in theory, but these are 2 examples of where we saw those jumps happen. And, if we look at the financial context for that, as market participants were seeing increased pressure on the central bank, they were basically increasing their bets and making that more and more unsustainable, which is eventually one of the things that led to that breaking of the peg.
Very cool. So why don't you also tell us a little bit about your academic background? I saw you became a director now. Congratulations.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned, it's been 5 or 6 years since I've been teaching in the program at BU. This fall, I took over the program director role for the program. So I'm super excited to do that. One of the best things about it has been reconnecting with alums and seeing their successes. You know, my motivation for doing this role is to just be part of those successes. It's the same as my motivation for writing the book. But when you see good students go on to do great things, it's really nice. And so stepping into this role, having more of an impact on those career outcomes is something I'm really excited about, and also having more of an impact on the shape of the program going forward.
I couldn't agree more. Working with students and watching them succeed has been some of the most rewarding parts of my life besides spending time with my daughter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially coming from industry, it's something that it's a very nice thing that you don't necessarily get from the sort of day-to-day in finance. So it's a nice combination to have.
So can students read this book and then come up with ideas for portfolio management and for new research projects?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. So I think because it's sort of a book, it's meant to be general, right? So if you're looking for an exact strategy to implement, this book will leave you a little bit wanting more. Having said that, you know, I've built my own set of strategies along the way, from different hedge funds I've worked at to Fidelity. And at each stop, the principles that I use and the concepts that I use are 100% in the book. And in some cases, that's very specific. So, you know, I talk about contango and carry trades in commodities and VIX, and that's something that I have personal experience in. So if you're interested in portfolio management and you're interested in those types of trading strategies, you can use those as definitely a baseline. And we even have some coding examples for you. If you're looking for a book that sort of says that you should implement this exact trading rule, it will leave you stopping a little bit short of that.
I apologize ahead of time. I have to ask this. Do you consider crypto a commodity, and do you have an overall opinion on crypto?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you'll notice that one omission from my book is crypto. And I would say that's because I would not consider myself an expert on crypto. So I think crypto itself has some work to do to define whether it is an asset class. There are certainly arguments both sides. I think this year it's showing, you know, impressive performance. But in my mind, it still has some work to do to show that it's sort of a legitimate asset class on its own.
I have Johns Hopkins Jim Lee coming over to my place for dinner tomorrow night with his daughters to pitch me on how crypto is an asset class. So I look forward to getting back to you with what he tells me. Yeah, Chris, this was a lot of fun, and everyone needs to go out and buy Chris's book. And Chris, I'll see you at the Fordham conference.
That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye-bye.